All right, I think we are all set, officially live. And all right, so with that, everyone, I am pleased to present two fantastic friends I've made in the recent weeks, months, uh, all here to discuss their great book, Ted Bundy, Memories of a Beast. We have E.J. Hammon and Fabien Richard, both authors. And, I'll start off with letting y'all each introduce yourself. So, EJ, if you want to kick it off.
All right, thanks so much. So I am actually, I've been writing for many years, but I really got involved in true crime probably 25 years ago. The first true crime book I ever read was Anne Rule's Stranger Beside Me, where she kind of talked about her experience with working on a suicide hotline with Ted Bundy, of all things. And I was just fascinated with that story. This person that nobody actually knew that he was running around town murdering people, but he seemed so normal. And I think that's really where I got hooked in the whole, crime, serial killing. And then I began a blog in 2009 about Ted Bundy and just wanted to analyze different parts of his life, different parts of his story. And truly, no matter how many killers I read about and learn about, it always comes back to Ted. There's just something that draws me to him. I think that there's a lot of information about him out there too, since he was killing in the 70s. There's been so many years since then. And just something that I just want to know what makes him tick, this organized killer that looked like everybody else on the street, this nice put together college student, law student. And so that's really where my writing and the true crime, the love of true crime combined themselves. And that's really where I started.
Wow. Okay. So you've been at this for a good long while.
Yes.
And it shows with the interviews. And before we get in there, Fabien, how about yourself? What kind of brought you to working and writing on crime investigations?
Yeah, but for me, my background is very different from the usual criminology writers. When I was young, I studied ballet, theater, and singing, and during the first years of my life. Now I'm 41, and I had started to write my own plays, and very soon I became interested in thrillers. I must admit that my father was a policeman during 25 years of his life, and my grandfather was a policeman too. During the same times, and I think that their careers inspire my thinking process and my style of writing. I wanting to combine my taste for literature with those childhood memories of my father investigating many murders and being a kind of hero. My family past created a present. I studied in style with my first book was concerning Marilyn Monroe. It was perhaps 50 years ago. It was my first book. It was 1235 Fifth Avenue Drive. It was the book concerning the death of Marilyn Monroe. After this, I had write a book concerning different murders in the place in the north of France. And after this, I was starting to write and to studies Ted Bundy perhaps 10 years ago.
Wow.
My first book was published in 2090. It was Lady Killers. It was a drama concerning Bundy. And after this, I have a dream in my thinking process. I want to write another book concerning Bundy, and especially concerning the confessions of people who have lived in this part of the life of Bundy. And Memories of the Beast was like the addition of my dream and the addition of my work concerning a killer like this. And AG was a perfect friendship for this, definitely.
Well, that's awesome. So y'all both have like a lot of experience kind of within this field and even looking at Ted Bundy. And what stuck out to me, and viewers, will definitely be discussing the book afterwards, as well as be sure to check it out in the comments. I'll have a link to it there. Is no one's really done it in the format that y'all did, which is, tackling all these different interviews, and not just, interviews focusing on one area, like policemen, investigators, but y'all got quite the array of people to agree to, sit down or, over the phone, what have you, discuss their, lived experiences, because, as you point out, and as I'm sure just about everyone knows now, those experiences that people have with a serial killer, especially those of the likes of Ted Bundy, are lifelong. Those never go away. So, just going on that, have y'all in any of your writings or research beforehand have ever conducted interviews in this manner before? EJ?
Okay.
This was actually a completely new experience for me.
Okay.
Fabien was very patient with me. We talked about who we wanted to reach out to, whose voices were most important for this type of book. I did actually have to go and re-interview one of the subjects that Fabien had already interviewed, because he's a very intelligent person, and he used a lot of industry language that was hard for me, even as a native English speaker in the United States. It was hard for me to understand some of what he was talking about. But it was the first time I'd ever done anything like this, and it was a really great experience. I really credit Fabien for being patient with me and help it, when I had questions, or when I wasn't sure about asking somebody, he was there for me and helped me out a lot.
Wow. So I kind of like following, combining that is, y'all clearly have a very, strong connection. You can tell, through reading, everything just seemed to mesh very well together. And, that kind of chemistry is incredibly important, especially writing on such a important topic containing such a, heinous individual who committed all these horrific acts. So it's one of those, what brought y'all together? What gets people thinking about this stuff, to come together? I always ask my students this.
You want to tell your side, Fabien?
This is the more important difficulties in these new adventures. For many years, I've been trying to find the right person who could be the ideal partners to write with my cycle of lady killers. It was not to be one. Then I had discovered the incredible and wonderful work of E.G. in his website, bundyfile.com. It was really strange. I was finally a person who studies Ted Bundy with sincerity, insight, and talent. I had seen so many researchers in love with Ted Bundy during the last 10 years, passionate in a morbid way, that I wanted to go against all of that. And essentially, E.G. was my most beautiful literary encounter to date, because during the starting of my work concerning Bundy, I had write different interviews for lady killers, and one of my dream, it was to have people who understand my point of view, my style, because my style is different. It's a thinking process of a Latin people who live in Europe, and an Anglo-Saxon people who live in America is completely different. But in reality, it's a perfect addition to have the perfect point of view concerning a killers, concerning the thinking process of a criminal like this. And at the end of the way, it was the best decisions I had taken in my life, sincerely, definitely.
And wow. From my point of view, I was actually really good friends with Kathy Kleiner, who was one of the survivors of Ted Bundy.
Yes.
And I actually profiled her on my blog, bundyfile.com. And she said, you know what, when we met in, this was at CrimeCon in New Orleans in 2019, she said, I've got a friend who has been looking for someone in the United States to help him write a book, someone that's in France and then someone that's here to write a book together. And she's actually the one that put us in touch with each other. So one of Ted Bundy's survivors is the reason that Fabien and I finally got together.
Sure.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's incredibly telling. And wow, actually knowing one of the survivors beforehand, because that kind of led to, I guess, understanding the foundation of how this book came to be, right? And I think from what y'all have already discussed, the motivation is quite clear. Both of y'all had a very strong interest in Ted Bundy. You've already written, blogged about him in the past. So one thing that stood out to me in this book is, as I was reading through it, and of course, there's a couple of people I'm like, oh, hey, I know that person, like Cloyd Steiger, great guy, very, very informative, and yeah, just fantastic. Yeah, he's great. Students loved him. I might get in trouble, but don't tell him that. No, I'm just kidding. But so, Cloyd's very easygoing, but with the wide array of individuals y'all had to interview for this book, did you find it difficult being able to reach out to some of those, people? Was it difficult for them to get them to agree to interview? Because I know this can be obviously a very personal and touchy subject, and that can be a huge obstacle as, again, as researchers trying to gather this kind of information. So did y'all experience any difficulties with that? If EJ, you want to take it first?
I did not have any problems personally. Fabien already had some connections, and then we had discussed some people we wanted to talk to. So I reached out to them on Facebook or other social media outlets and didn't have an issue. We did have one journalist that had covered the case that wanted to play games. It seemed he wanted to get information without really participating. But once we realized that wasn't going anywhere, we moved on, and it wasn't, we didn't need his voice for the story. Other than that, I didn't have any issue with reaching out to people.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, sincerely, with a lot of passion, I think, and a lot of work, with my friendship with many people who lived through the heavens, many of whom were also friends with EG. We didn't have much difficulty. I think with humanity, brotherhood, and love were driving forces of our common adventure, sincerely. I remember the first time when I spoke with Kevin M. Sullivan. He was an incredible writer. I'd write perhaps 10 books concerning Ted Bundy. I remember the first time when I have a surprise of Kevin. He had said, okay, Fabien, look your computer tonight. I have a surprise for you. And when I was starting my Zoom, it was with Cady Kleiner. I was in front of Cady and I spoke the first time with her. It was like a miracle for me, because I had remember perhaps 15 years ago when I looked the first movie concerning Ted Bundy in a TV show in France. I had looked the story of the victims, and to be in front of a victim like Cady, for me, is an hero. It was like a miracle. It was like a connection of my thinking process and the reality of terrible murders like this and terrible killings like this. And it was my first connection in reality with Ted Bundy, in the Ted Bundy reality, sincerely. And in front of this, it was like a lot of love, like an ocean of emotions, sincerely. But with humanity, all of the problems are not the problems, definitely. When you want to write a books, so you have humanity is more important, definitely.
Agreed. And that's, again, that you kind of touched on a huge part is, with especially these, even, surviving victims, right? And I think Kathy went to one of the cold case conferences. I think COVID's kind of shut them down, but, myself and Cloyd and a couple others would often frequent them. And just being able to talk to those who've experienced it, have witnessed it, that, we talk about interviewing individuals, in a very different facet of my, what I teach to students. There's a different thing when you're interviewing someone on talking about a traumatic experience that they witnessed, or the things, the trauma that they had to see. So is there anything y'all, either one of you could say to kind of speak to on, what helped you prepare for these interviews? Because, it is very sensitive ground, and, how you approach this.
Regarding, did you have something you wanted to start with, Fabien?
For me, the more important, you explain an important part of the work of students in criminology in reality. You have two points of view. when I had speak with my father, for example, who had worked in police during 35 years in France, it was in criminal police. He had worked in many cases of murders in France. I want to have just an answers. What the best way of work when you want to speak with a victim of a crime, when you want to be in connection with her, what the more important facts you want to present. And he had saying first, the more important is to be a good people in humanity, to speak with your heart, and to think of the murders with respect. When you speak with the people who was a victim of a crime like this, the more important is not to speak, is to listen. In first is this. The more important when you want to write a criminological book, or when you write, I don't know, a true crime book or a serial killer book, you say what I want. The more important is this. You listen. So you listen. At the end, you have the best interview concerning a murder like this, concerning a crime or a violent crime in of serial killer, I don't know. But I think this is the more important point when you work in this point, is to write the story of the people, but in first is to listen. Definitely.
I definitely agree with that. And EJ, what about, what helped you, or your thoughts on preparing for these kind of interviews?
When preparing for that, Fabien's absolutely right. You do want to be prepared to listen. And I felt like if I approached the people that I was reaching out to, and that I was sensitive to what they might say or what they might need, that was helpful. When I reached out to Debbie Ciccarelli Glover, she was the neighbor of one of the women that was attacked in Florida. This was at the separate house, not at the sorority. She was next door neighbor, and she actually told me that she had never been approached by anyone writing a book about Bundy before for her point of view. And that really shocked me because her point of view was really important. She was the person that called the police that night. That stopped the attack on her neighbor and saved her life. And I don't know if people really understood how important she was, but they also never tried to reach out to get her point of view. And that was really surprising. And she thanked me for that. And she also called once she read her chapter in the book. She called both, I think she may have written to Fabien and thanked us just for allowing her to give her point of view in this book.
Yeah, and I want to push precision because I haven't explained this, but it's like, for me, the first time when I speak of this in an interview in America or in France, but it's important for me to explain my particularity. I must also admit that in childhood, I was a victim of sexual abuse. And in certainly forget my character, a victim always add more easily to a victim. At least I think so. And even I have never used this in this order of the prospect people that I was talking to, but also to make them feel comfortable. But I think that my position of victim in the past, it was like, it's really important. It's not really important, but it's like a connection between a victim and a victim. I think this. I just want to precise this. It's not to cry or it's not to be sad, but it's just to explain, and that the people who listen the interview tonight understand clearly this. When you are the victim and you speak at another victim, is more easy to understand the feelings of aggression, of sexual aggression, or a feeling like this. The sensation is completely different. And it was one of the first words of my father was this: when you're a policeman and you speak with a victim, you're a policeman again. After this, you're a policeman again. The victim is again a victim. But for me, it was different. I was a victim to speak at a victim. It was completely different.
Wow. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, the fact that no one ever has approached her about, and I mean, the person who, in a sense was the first one to see the carnage and all the horror, these horrible things that happened at the sorority house. And that's a lot to take in. And I think that is really telling. And this kind of will lead to the next question, that the fact that no one's gotten her perspective before, again, kind of lends credence to the unique outlook that this book gives, because there's so much out there, different perspectives. And kind of to Fabien's point, this connection between victims and, in a sense, like once you're a victim to something like this, once you witness it, it's one of those that lives with you, to various extents for the rest of your life. And, there can be, when you see others, you definitely have probably that sense of compassion because, right, it's, what it's like to be victimized in that sense. So I think that is incredibly telling. And I appreciate, y'all's kind of insights into that. And like I was saying, this kind of gives credence to the next, question I had is, just how do y'all think, I think it's become clear now that all these different experiences, perspectives that you found from the multitude of interviews, right, really does make a unique approach to understanding and looking at Ted Bundy, something that's usually not really done before, right? Because everyone analyzes, it's almost one of those talking in, law enforcement terms, right? It's very usually always offender focused, right? So everyone's always looking at Ted. What was his life? What did he go through? But even now, law enforcement is starting to become looking more at, victimology. Like, what's the aspect of all the victims? And I really think y'all's book did that because it's not something that's really done. So is there more you have to kind of speak on that, kind of what, because again, I think it is a fair thing to say that this unique perspective added a huge point into understanding Ted Bundy that had not yet been really explored. So, and do you have anything to say about that, Fabien?
I think this is certainly your greatest strength. Your very complementary profiles and your different adventures on two different continents. I had explained 10 minutes ago my Latin and European culture added to e.g. Anglo-Saxon and American ones has certainly created the best possible cocktails to consider writing about this story with the most distance possible, right? Being totally involved in it. My background as an artist and author combined with the AG background of passionate created the most intense friendship. I could have imagined to write the best book on Ted Bundy with Ted Bundy Memories of the Best. This is certainly why so many people have emphasized this difference to the list of one are John Douglas or Ken Catharis, or like you, Carlton. We have many people who are so different in this story. We have policemen, we have victims, we have friends of victims, we have doctors, psychological specialists, we have FBI members like John Douglas or Mark Seferick. This is certainly the first time that John Douglas had write the first page on a book concerning Ted Bundy project. When I had speak the first time with Mark Seferick, it was like a dream for me. Because during the last 10 years, I had opened my computers on my TVs, and it was in the TV shows. It was the same with John Douglas. But the first time when I look at my Hunter on Netflix, I had a dream in my head. It's just to say, I want to speak with the guy who had write this book, definitely. And I remember the first time when I pushed my invitation on Facebook, I think it was a fake profile, sincerely. With John Douglas, I had seen this. But I remember at this part of his life, John had a problem with a French writer. It was a cheater. His name is Stéphane Bourgoin. And I remember the first sentences of John Douglas. So you ate Stéphane Bourgoin is the same for me. I want to kill this guy. This guy is very strange. I want to speak with you because you're not the same. It was the first word. It was the first word of John. And after this, when you are in connection, when you have friendship with people like this, sincerely, the perspectives and the experiences of e.g. of my experiences in the life are completely different. And this is the best cocktail in the world to write a book concerning Bundy. Definitely.
Yeah.
EJ?
I really do feel that the book is unique. It's not just unique, but it's relatively unheard of as far as, you're right. So many true crime books are based on the killer or the perpetrator. We hear their story all the time. And unfortunately, so many people don't get to tell theirs. And I feel like this time we gave people opportunities. There were some people that weren't ready to tell their story, one of the survivors in particular. But we wanted to give them that option. We wanted to say, look, we're here to tell your story, not his. And, it really was just really exciting. The book, I'm so grateful to Fabien because this really was his vision. And I was allowed to come in and be a part of it. And that's just been such just something that I really enjoyed working with him. So I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, it definitely shows. And, y'all's passion, I think, definitely comes out in this, beautiful finished product. And, again, not to spoil it for listeners and those who check out the video, some of those that you interviewed and you were kind of going into it, detectives and forensic psychiatrists, those two I'm especially interested in because, one of them's Cloyd Steiger, know him very well, and also John Liebert. And I think it's what comes off to me, and I know I hear this from students all the time, and y'all probably see this a lot too, is, everyone watching all the new documentaries on Ted Bundy, Dahmer, and everything like that. Well, those are for what they are, right? But one thing that stands out, and it's always curious to me, is thinking about the science, because again, y'all's book, by capturing these kind of different interviewees, kind of allows for that. So, my next question is really wondering, how you think homicide investigators and forensic psychiatrists, have adapted since Bundy, because between technology, methods, it is completely changed. So I'd like to hear y'all's thoughts. If I don't know who'd like to start. If EJ, you'd like to take a shot first?
Sure, I'll start. No problem. Excuse me. So what I think is so exciting about the Ted Bundy saga, if you will, is that forensics really has come a long way since the 70s. The police officers had to be creative sometimes when it came to figuring out how are we going to be able to keep this person in jail. For example, Ken Katsaris, who was the sheriff of Leon County in Florida, in Tallahassee, that took control of Bundy when he was arrested in Florida, actually had to get creative. He was able to get a search warrant for Ted Bundy's mouth. That had never been done before. They had never, ever had that before. And he kept thinking, well, I'll get Bundy to maybe eat some fruit, when he's in his jail cell, and we'll get his bite marks. Well, that didn't work. And so he actually conscripted his own dentist along with another dentist to actually take a cast of Bundy's teeth. And the reason they did that was to match to one of the bodies of the victims where there were double bite mark. So Bundy, the way the Katsaris tells it is that Bundy just had no idea where they were going at night because it wasn't time for court. And so Katsaris and the other officers take him to Katsaris's dentist, and he just pitches a fit until he realizes there's a search warrant. And, just stories like that where police and people involved had to get creative. Where Larry Simpson, who was the prosecutor of the first trial in Miami for the Chi Omega murders and the Dunwoody attack, talks about having found that one bite mark photo with the ruler in it. And it's things like that were really first in the Bundy saga, in that part of history, and it's really paved a way for where forensics are today. I think now that we've got DNA advanced the way it is, we've got cameras everywhere. We've got, there are just the way that science has advanced, computers. And I feel like we've come so far that we're actually catching, well, not we, but police are actually catching serial killers much earlier in their, in where they're just starting out or before they killed more than one person. So I really think that the Bundy story, there were so many different things that changed science, so it's fascinating to me.
I totally agree. It's especially I think of, you might know him, Jared Bradley, but he works with the, his MVAC systems. And oh man, that blew me away when I first saw it. And, all these other students, like this thing, it's like, basically a vacuum. It's picking up all the stuff, and it is just so much significantly better at picking up and tracing DNA than your typical cotton swab and everything. And, you know, it's one of those, why doesn't everyone have these things? Because, right, you know, it is becoming more difficult for murders, you know, again, thankfully. So, you know, serial killers, you don't have them. You just have murderers because they're not given that chance. So I think that definitely, you know, you hit on a lot of those important factors of just how we've kind of evolved and, you know, from getting creative, yeah, with the whole take him to the dentist.
Yeah.
Fabien, what about, you know, your thoughts on, you know, this kind of evolution of forensics and investigations?
I remember when I had the first idea of writing this book and presenting the project to AG, I had this in my mind, to show that a case is never really seen for every angle, essentially, and that had many professionals or every people who could bring us a new vision. Talking to witnesses who had never spoken before was the first step, but above allowing the testimony of professional was my greatest dream. Definitely, it was my dream, definitely. By listening to Claude or to listening Dr. Lebert, for example, it was AJ who had speak with Lebert every time because it was essentially really completely to understand clearly the vision of Dr. Lebert, because he's a specialized, he's a doctor, psychological doctors. Sometimes his explanation was really difficult for me or for AJ because it was really scientist, definitely. But I quickly understood that there was still a lot to learn in the field of criminology, and the mysteries were still numerous. In this confession, in reality, we can learn new lessons, new ways of looking and investigating serial killers. And as Stephen Giancarlo so beautiful, but Ted Bundy Memories of the Beast is now a new tool for criminology students. Wow. I remember when I looked at the first time, is now a new tool for criminology students around the world. When I looked at the first time in Amazon, I just think, okay, my dream to build a book with scientists, with doctors, with policemen, with victims, with simple people of the life. Because in the book, this is a mystery of this book, because we have feminists, for example, like Jane Capote. It was like to bet on a sportive bet. When you think, okay, I want to speak with a feminist in this book concerning the case of Ted Bundy, what do you think this, essentially? When I think this the first time, I remember it was the same with Dr. Libert. Okay, I want to speak with this guy because he was a member of the Ted Bundy task force. I'd think, okay, what's a good way of work to speak with a guy like this? And at the end, this is a difference with a normal book concerning Ted Bundy and the book built with E.G. It was essentially the difference. Completely.
Yeah, and you know, you talk about it as I do agree. It's a criminological tool that students, you know, and we kind of hit on this before. It just, how do you conduct interviews, right? Because it's maybe perhaps not the same as interrogations, but just interviewing. I mean, when people think law enforcement interviews, a lot of them immediately think, you know, interrogations or things like that. But it's like, no, there's tons of kind of this kind of communication, you know, building that rapport with people in such short order. And again, what kind of questions to ask? How do you approach sensitive topics? You know, I always talk to my students, you know, you can't, if you're curious about, you know, what it is that you're truly, you know, trying to understand, usually if it's a sensitive question, you can't right out of the gate ask that question, right? You have to ask others, but it also helps you to, you know, and as Fabien, you said this, you know, just listen, is to kind of build a larger picture. So once you finally get to that question that, you know, is kind of the crux of your whole interview, you have the whole context. It makes a lot more sense, right? And that's useful as investigators or profilers, you have to be able to kind of piece these things apart, being able to understand in greater context and kind of what was the state of mind of both victim, potentially the offender, killer, you know, in these kind of situations. And absolutely, I think, you know, from these myriad of, you know, interviews, I think that kind of lends to that, you know, it helps them see these various approaches. So with that, you know, clearly this book is great on helping individuals understand, you know, this different depraved side of Ted Bundy, right? Everyone knows the basic depravity of it, you know, y'all were talking about but this really tackles it again from a unique direction. So with all these interviews, especially those, you know, non-law enforcement, how else do you think, you know, we could expand, you know, further on understanding Ted Bundy?
Sincerely, so I want to be sincere. I don't think that I wrote this book so that people will understand Ted Bundy depravity or in the end. It was just my opinion, but rather so they will understand a man can accept humanity at its most monstrosity. Sincerely, in the end, I believe that this book demonstrates something that can still be studied in the case of Ted Bundy. It is the willingness of a man to make love to death. And in this, we have taken the challenge to make students of criminology around the world understand this. Ted Bundy wanted to empathize that a man can become a wild beast when he finally accepts his bestiality in total way. And in part of the case, I am very proud to bring to new reflection or lines of research in the world of academic or police criminology. I think in the case, especially of Ted Bundy, it was just a man who had think this, okay, I'm a human, but in reality, a human who understands clearly the humanity is a guy who accepts that it's possible to be human or to be a beast. And in the case of Ted Bundy, he had accepted is part of bestiality. I think this. It was completely different of the other crime because when I had speak with Cloyd, for example, I remember that the first time that I speak with Klaus Tiger, it was policeman in Seattle during perhaps 35 years. He's an incredible guy. And he had explained this. He had remember the first time we had looked the pictures of Bundy in his office at Seattle. He had remembered this. And he had think at this time, wow, it's so strange because this guy is so human. He has the same face like my father, my brother, of the people of my family. I don't understand. It's not possible to be a killer with a face like this. Was the problem of this guy? And I remember he had said in front of the pictures of Bundy, I just say, why this guy is a killer? Because he's like me. He's the same face like me. It's so strange. And at the end, I think this is more important. It's to understand that a people like you and me, or E.G., for example, because sometimes serial killers are women. It's just like when you push on a button, you decide to push of the death button, of the bad button, or hit the good button. And Ted Bundy had choice to push in the bad button, and he had built a way of killings, and he had built a way of death and way of evil. Definitely, this is more important for me. It's not to understand clearly the depravity, but to understand for a normal guy, it's possible to switch like this in 1 minute. 1 minute ago, you was a normal guy, and after this, you had changed, and now you're a killer. It's different. It's difficult to understand this clearly, but it was like this, definitely.
Oh yeah, there's, I mean, you know, with tons of serial killers, and you know, Bundy, that's what in part made him so fascinating and terrifying, especially when it came out, was, you know, he was a renowned, you know, charmer, right? You know, he could be having a great conversation, you meet, you know, talking, you know, talk about past hobbies, right? At one point, he was on a, forgive me, if it was a congressman or like a senator, like a running, like he was on their political party, right? He was very well involved and well spoken. But, you know, again, to Fabien, your point, it's like, you know, snap your fingers, you know, hit a button, and then all of a sudden it's this polar opposite behavior.
I had remember souvenirs of Cloud where they had explained the first time when they had remember when Ted Bundy was died in 1989. He remembered this. He was in his home, and then he had think that it was possible for a guy to die in 1 minute like this, because in this story it was a killer. This is the consequences in reality. He was a normal guy. He chose to be the son of devil, and at the end, you died for this. But it's normal. But it's really important to understand what the consequences of the life and the point in the stories of Ted Bundy. We have built the story of Bundy to be a serial killer. This is more important. It's more important that to understand. So it's a religion, a question of depravity, or a question of education. Is more complicated like this. You know this. It's more complicated. And this is more important is to have all of the information to understand clearly what's the different way of life we have built. The story of a guy who was a really good student. It was a really good guy. It was a politician. It was beautiful. It was sportive. He liked the girls. He liked music. And in 10 minutes like this, all of his life had changed because he had taken a bad decision. It's a decision to be the devil. It was this, definitely.
Absolutely. And EJ, how about, kind of your thoughts on?
As far as my hope for the book, I'm really hoping that when people consider a killer like Bundy, they're actually thinking about the survivors, the people that and the victims. We tend to put them in the background so often. We think about the killer, and really, I mean, they're the ones who have not done anything to be a part of the story. And suddenly they're thrust into this world of violence and, or loss if they're, losing a friend or a family member. And so what I like about the book is that we got so many different angles of people and how it affected each of them throughout the Bundy saga. And, really, I felt like that was a big part of why I did it, was to help those victims have a voice, to help those survivors have a platform where they could share their story and, how it changed their lives. Kathy Kleiner didn't finish college. She did not want to go back to that world. And you just have to consider, I mean, that completely changed her trajectory. And with Kathy, she's an amazing individual, and she has really made so many wonderful choices. And she's never looked back. And she actually has a book that's coming out in October about her life. It's not just about Bundy. But you have to consider the other people who didn't make it and how that affected their surviving family and friends. I
could not agree more. And again, this kind of comes back to what I think makes y'all's book so special is, right, giving a voice to the victims, right? Those who usually aren't really focused on when looking at Ted Bundy. And frankly, this applies to pretty much all serial killers that people read about, right? Is like, there's not this amount of in-depth interviewing or exploration into these, victims, other people who worked on the case. It's not just investigators, right, or forensic psychiatrists, but again, getting a fuller, I don't want to say worldview, I don't think that's the right word, but just a fuller, better understanding, right? So I absolutely agree. I think that is an important concept to, honestly may get lost more often than not, and people don't quite realize it. But it is important. It's important to, bring light to what are the lifelong repercussions for, typically the single individual's actions. And the fact is, it affects more, just countless people. So do y'all have any other, I have a couple other questions, but just regarding the book, do y'all have anything else y'all would like to add? So hopefully I didn't give any spoilers away. So everyone, like I said, link will definitely be in the comments. Please pick up this book. It's worth the read. It's really, really intriguing. If you're like me, just jumping from these different kind of viewpoints on this topic. But EJ, Fabien, anything, about Ted Bundy and Memories of the Beast?
Fabien?
EJ.
I don't know if you were going to ask about, there was a question you had about people that were close to Bundy in the non-law enforcement world. I was so thrilled that Fabien actually got in touch with Larry Anderson, who was one of Bundy's friends in Salt Lake City, Utah. And he was also the former stake missionary for the local parish of the Mormon church there. And that's how he got to know Bundy, was Bundy actually wanted to become a member of the local church of Latter-day Saints. And so I just really loved Larry's perspective on getting to know Ted, what he was like in a social way. Someone that Ted knew that wasn't a love interest, I thought was just really fascinating, that they were peers in a sense. And I was really excited about reading what Fabien discussed with him.
I just want to explain this sincerely and definitely. When to see Bundy in his entirety and complexity is to understand that a man like you and me become a terrifying assassin in seconds. Bundy didn't just wake up one morning and decide, I was a killer. It wasn't this. His past was long, sourceful, and structured. He created the ideal conditions for his killing spree. Having the point of view of people outside the police or the world of science finally makes it possible to make the link between the analysis and sometimes like of humanity and police investigation. I just want that the people who listen tonight, the show, that to understand that it's really important to have another point of view that the other books that were in the past. Because when I was young, I remember I looked perhaps my first books containing the serial killers. I was 14. I was in the airport of Montreal, and my first souvenir was with Jeffrey Dahmer. The name was the Milwaukee Master. It was the name of the books. I remember this particularly, and I was shocked by the story of a guy like this. And it was in my thinking process. I remember this. I just say, okay, what are the consequences in the life of a guy? It's possible to build a story like this. I remember this clearly, and I hope sincerely that Ted Bundy Memories of the Past is a new way of work for students, for people who are passionate about the serial killers, or who want to understand clearly the story of victims, the story of policemen, the story of scientists who have permitted to resolve this case and to cut the ends of Bundy to stop the killings of innocents. It was the more important for me. Definitely.
Wow. Yes. That's well said. I mean, it really, again, the talk with Larry and it just made me start thinking about kind of this whole, the social aspects of serial killers, right? Because often, not often, they are usually diagnosed as psychopaths. And it's just, you have all these clinical terms, right? These forensic terms, but getting the point of view of people who see them outside, right? It's, again, it's like you have the clinical that's, that is important, but getting people's perspectives of like, how did they actually interact? So like, Larry in the Mormon church, like, wow, does this kind of like, reinforce, like, how does this kind of link with, what was scientifically diagnosed or clinically diagnosed, excuse me. So I think it helps. I think it's important all for building into that context. Kind of these last couple questions, also sent around, just obviously from Facebook, social media, y'all have multiple projects going on. So I'd love to, give y'all some, the floor, as it were, podium. Yeah, sure. To, talk about, what you got in the works. So I don't know who'd like to start, if Fabien or EJ, just kind of what you got brewing, books, other projects.
Yeah. I have the firm ambition that will be able to write a book that will be the last opus of the triptych I imagine on Bundy, as a story told in the rehearse of action, as a testimony of the actors of the story. And I would like to finish with a book that will give the word to the victims of the families. I think it will be the more important to finish the stories. I was starting with a drama. In the middle, it was testimonies and opinion of scientists, of victims, of friends of victims, etc. And I want to finish with the families of victims, definitely, because the new woman who died too young and to whom life promised the best. I have already spoken with AG normally about this project, and she has agreed that we will starting now this common adventure soon. And I think perhaps it will be possible to speak of the last books of my triptych with AG in 1 year. It will be finished definitely.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, working with Fabien again is going to be really interesting. We are going to focus mostly on the families and friends of the victims, give them the voice in this final book for his trilogy. And we are actually working on marketing our current book, and hopefully we'll have some book signings in North Carolina, which is where I'm located. We may be looking at Florida as well. I know Fabien wanted to focus on other areas where Bundy.
Yeah, I will be in Vegas for 2 months between May and July, like every year. It's one of my big projects because I think it will be really important to speak of the book in French and in English, because you have I worked in another life. I work in the industry of poker, and I have many connections with the players. We have too much money to buy the books. It's really important. And I want to speak of the project of my drama because it will be starting in September in France. Lady Killer will be stage in France at Paris and in the north of France in September. Wow. And one of my dream is I have the dream to be with EG at Orlando for the Crime-Con in September. Okay. It's one of my dream. I work for this with my partners, with my editors, and with my friends. And I think I will be in Vegas for sure in May. And I hope I will be at Orlando in September for the Crime-Con. It was my dream because I want to speak in live with Caddy and with people like this, with Karen Chandler, or with people who want to be here, Ken Catharis, because Orlando will be perfect. It's like it's a connection directly with the people who lived in Florida. I have Caddy, Karen, Kat, many
Debbie.
people who lived in Florida. It will be possible to be in connection with all of the crews of people who had built the books, Ted Bundy, Memories of the Past, definitely.
It will be good to finally meet Fabien in person. We've not done any of this in person.
Just in computers every time, just in computers.
Yeah, just computer, WhatsApp, email.
So yes, for those who are not familiar, listeners and viewers, there's quite a big geographical space between our authors here. But I think that adds, also a nice, touch to it. Again, another perspective when it comes to writing.
Yeah, it will be cool. But, in reality, in this project, this is a more incredible and this is a more important for me, is that it's possible when you have dream to work with the people who live in the other side in the world, in the other side of the planet. It's possible to work with the people who lived in America, to speak with the people like you, Colton. Thank you very much for tonight, for the show,
of course,
or for the interview, because for me, it's really important to explain this project. Because I want that many people understand clearly why I want to work concerning the case of Ted Bundy. It was not a dream. I was not a researcher. I was not a lover of serial killers. It was not this. My life was not like this, because I like ballet, I like to sing, I like to be an actor or to be writers. But in reality, I remember when I was young, I had a dream. I don't want to be a policeman like my father or like my grandfather, because I had listened too much stories of people who are killed by crazy people or by killers in my life. And I remember one time, perhaps it was 15 years ago, it was during a night, my father back of a shooting of 5 young people. It was the father who had killed all of the children. I remember this. And when my father back in the home, I remember his face. I remember he was completely shocked, sincerely. And it was not a dream in my life to work concerning the serial killers or to write containing the serial killers. But at the end, when I looked the first time the story of Ted Bundy at the TVs, and when I looked the faces of victims, I'd say, okay, I want to have an answer for the people like this. I want to have an answer for the victims. This is more important for me, definitely. And thank you very much again, Colton, for this, because it's important that people like you build the possibilities to speak of project like this. Definitely.
Oh, no, thank y'all. I'm so grateful to have y'all, to just come on, talk about your book, talk about your experiences, just the motivations. I think that's so important. And this is something I try to impress upon, my students is, again, just understanding the full context of, you walk into a crime scene, you can have your theories, it's important to understand, but even where we're seeing a lot of focus is more on victimology, focus more on the victim. They will tell you their stories, even if they are deceased, their families, their friends, like it will all build that picture and all this is so far being shown to be a better approach to catching criminals. Now, if it's in every case, that I'm not too sure. But it seems to be what a lot are looking, kind of starting to see a trend in. So curious to follow that. And again, that's why I really, was drawn to y'all's book, once I started reading, read it in a day. It is one of those, I will warn you, it's hard to put down because as soon as you get done with someone's interview, it's like, oh, now let's see what, the detective says. Let's see what the one of the victims that escaped, Larry, I think it starts with Larry, right? It's, just one thing after the other, but it's to this point of this kind of theory of build upon the victim, or in this case, victims, to understand this person's nature, Ted Bundy's nature. So again, very grateful for both of you taking the time. I know Fabien, it's like almost 1 a.m. Where you're at.
But I want to have a special word for Klaus Steiger tonight, because I'd say he had listened to the show tonight, and thank you very much, Clyde. He's in his home and he had listened all of the show. He had like on Facebook, he had like on Instagram, he had like on Twitch. Thank you, Clyde. They had listened all of the show, and this guy was incredible. It was like the others, sincerely, it was like Ken Caceres or the others, but sincerely, just for Klaus Steiger, I want to have a special word for him. Yeah.
Most definitely. He's going to hear it. He'll be watching this.
Thanks, Chloe.
Well, all right. So that's all I had, but Fabien, EJ, any last words, anything, you'd like to add?
I hope the show tonight, it was a good experience for the students. For me, it was the more important. I have a dream in reality that many people, students in the world, look the book or understand the case of Ted Bundy with the book or with another book or with a TV show or with a show. It's not the more important in reality. I just want to speak of the experience of victims. For me, it's the more important. It's not that the people will buy my books of AG and me is not really important in reality, because when you build a book like this, it's just like you want to give all of the information at the others, and after this your work is finished. Mm-hmm. This is more important. You give at the others, and after this is finished. But my dream is that after when I have give, that the other people give again and again and again and again and again and again. Mm-hmm. It's like a line. It's like a line of humanity, even more important. And thank you very much again for tonight.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to echo what Fabien said. We really did this for the victims, and just being able to get to know some of these individuals and to hear their stories directly was such an honor. We were very grateful to them for their participation and just for being able to help them get their story out there.
Well, I think the book does a fantastic job of doing that. And again, everyone, it is Ted Bundy, Memories of the Beast. You can find it on Amazon. Again, I'll have it down in the comments. There'll be links, so you'll definitely be able to find it. Thank you all again. Really had a great time with the discussions with our authors here, EJ Hammon and Fabien Richard. And until the next one, everyone, I really appreciate y'all coming out, and I'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, Calden.
Thanks.